Welcome everyone to the Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference Renewable Energy Series Contractor Webinar for Residential Small Business Solar. Before we get started, here are a couple housekeeping items to go over. First, your audio will be muted during the session. If you hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a toolbar pop up. This toolbar has the Q&A where you can submit questions during the webinar for the speakers to review at the end of the presentations. There's also a hands up feature. If you're having technical issues, you can click on that and we'll do our best to help you out. This session will be recorded and available on the Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference website at www.nebraskawsc.com in the next few days. With that, I'm going to turn this session over to our first speaker, David Rich, Sustainable Energy Manager with the Nebraska Public Power District. David?
Good morning, and thank you, Anita. We're glad that we've got about 35 participants joining at this point in time. I have a slide that discusses a little bit the historical installations in Nebraska. And you can see that with OPPD, LES, and NPPD, the total was around 1,000 installations in total. And that is quite a bit fewer than you may see in some states. For example, Hawaii and California have considerably more solar. And the question is it because of the sun? No, it's not because they have better solar, it's because they have much higher electric rates. Nebraska is fortunate with public power to have some of the lowest electric rates in the state. And to speak to rates, Mark Skolnick from LES will be discussing utility rates.
Thank you very much, Dave, and thank you to everybody who has logged on today. We've got a variety of folks here, including contractors and customers and a variety of other interests. And we hope that you'll find the next hour and a half very informative, and we look forward to engaging in Q&A as we get through the presentation we have here. Electric rates is probably a good place to start because there tends to be some confusion amongst a variety of different groups. It may be customers, it may be installers. And there are many utilities across the state. There are over 160 to be sure. We represent 3 of the largest, but Nebraska has a rich public power tradition, and there are public power providers all across the state. And so it can be a bit challenging. And so it really is important for you to understand your electric rate so that you can begin to assess the financials as it relates to putting solar on your home or business. So I'd like to open up with a question, and I want you to consider the question, and then I want you to put your answer, if you want, into the chat located at the bottom of your screen. You have a little chat button. Would a customer be billed if they use 0 kilowatt hours in a month? Would a customer be billed if they use 0 kilowatt hours in a month? And we're starting to see folks respond in the chat. And I'll just give it another few seconds here. I even have an of course. Okay, so I think everybody's gotten the correct response here, and the answer is yes. But I think it's important to talk about the why. So why is it that there would be a charge if there's no energy? Does anybody want to put in a guess in their chat box and indicate why there would be a charge? Let's see what we get here. There's a question mark with service fees, facilities charge. Yeah, absolutely. O&M, meter fees, facility charges, taxes, infrastructure. Absolutely, all of those are correct. And to be sure, I think the industry has done a disservice to customers and to other folks as it pertains to where most of our costs fall. There's a lot of conversation about fuel, right? We talk about coal, natural gas, wind, solar, the sun energy. Now, all of those are different fuel sources, but you don't hear utilities often talk about infrastructure. In other words, what does it take to provide our customers with the most reliable service possible? And that means you need to have adequate generation. You have to have adequate transmission to transport that energy over hundreds and hundreds of miles, and adequate distribution systems that include substations, transformers at the facility level, all of that fixed infrastructure. The utility has to recover the costs on all of that to ensure that you have reliable service and the capacity to serve your load, your facility, your home, regardless of whether you use a kilowatt hour or not. We have an obligation to do that. So let me ask a poll question here and delve into this a bit more. Let me put this first question up here and we'll see what we get here. And here is the question. I'm going to launch this again. Let's see here if I can launch. It's not letting me launch here. So I will just ask the question. And you can just answer in the chat box. And the question is true or false. Here's the question, or here's a statement, and you respond true or false. To determine estimated electric bill savings for a net metered solar installation, you simply divide the bill by the kilowatt hours consumed. Is that the proper way to determine the estimated electric bill savings? And I'm seeing responses come in. So everybody who's responded has been correct. The answer is false. The answer is false. However, it's interesting that we have seen proposals from solar companies, not all by any stretch of the imagination, but we have seen online proposals where that's exactly how a customer is being presented, where their potential savings would lie. You just simply take the total bill and you divide it by the kilowatt hours and you come up with maybe 12 or 14 cents a kilowatt hour. But that's not the right way to determine what that financial impact will be. And we'll get into the correct way here in a moment. So let's talk about how rates are structured. An electric rate is simply a mechanism for utilities to recover fixed and variable costs in a fair and non-discriminatory manner. That's all an electric rate is. Here are the fixed costs. It goes from the customer support that each account is provided. It includes all of this infrastructure that I talked about, all the way down to the meter, the purchase and the maintenance of the meters that are in your service territory, and all of this infrastructure, transmission and distribution, and then the debt service on the generation. And so all of that has to be paid for regardless of how many kilowatt hours are generated in a given year. And the variable costs are primarily the fuel. There are some variable costs that aren't fuel, but they're not significant. There is some variable operations and maintenance at the generation level, but for the most part, fuel costs are the biggest driver of the variable costs. So we have coal, natural gas, the sun for solar and wind. And so the way the utility has charged for these, though, kind of sends a mixed signal. This is an example of a simple bill. This happens to be one of my bills from one of the months here. And if you look at it, and you're probably used to seeing this type of thing, there's an energy charge, and there's an amount that's consumed, and that's the cost for that amount consumed. Then there's a customer charge, and that's, and I'll get into the various aspects. So the energy charge, theoretically, it should just be paying for the fuel, right? Theoretically. The customer charge pays for the customer support. It's the customer service and the account maintenance expenses. the information systems, that type of thing for customer billing. And then you have a facilities charge, which pays for the infrastructure, distribution, all of the various infrastructure and generation. But it's really important to understand is, I don't know if you see this dotted line, that all of these costs aren't just in the facilities charge. There's a portion that's also embedded in the energy charge. And that is what gets confusing because it inflates the actual cost of energy, okay? The actual cost of purchasing energy out of the wholesale market, in our case, the Southwest Power Pool, is a lot less than what you'd be led to believe because we have fixed costs embedded in the energy rate. Okay. Now LES has decoupled the costs associated with the distribution system, but there are still transmission and generation costs embedded in the energy rate. And so that gets kind of confusing. But over time, utilities will move these fixed costs into facilities charges, or maybe at some point down the road, there may even be what's called a demand charge to recover costs associated primarily with generation. And the reason that this has become a problem for utilities and why this move has had to occur is it used to be a utility could count on constant growth year over year. And so as energy consumption increased, the fixed costs were being recovered. But we noticed in the early to mid 2010s that energy consumption was flattening out. Energy efficiency and energy codes had all made a large impact. And so that's okay from a fuel standpoint, but we still have to recover the fixed cost to provide the reliable service. And so utilities have been moving some of those fixed costs out of the energy rate. And over time, that will continue. So essentially, to figure out what the energy rate is, where the financial savings can be achieved through things like solar, you don't take the total bill and divide it by the kilowatt hours to get your rate. You essentially take the energy rate and divide it by kilowatt hours, right? So instead of 10 cents in this case, the actual is 8 cents. And in fact, as you know, utilities typically have seasonal rates where in the summer and the winter, the rates may differ. In our case at LES, we're about 8 cents in the summer and about 5.5 cents in the winter. And that makes a bit of difference with solar because you're going to be offsetting a little bit higher priced energy because of more production in the summer than the winter. So when determining the financial impacts for solar, primarily you want to look at the per kilowatt hour cost of energy and using that energy charge rather than the total bill. And one last item before I turn things over for our next discussion is where is energy going to go in the future? Because that's important. When you make an investment in a solar system, you're making a 20 to 30 year investment. And you need to get a feel for what's the value of the energy being produced over that period of time. Well, historically, for at least the last 10 years, the energy rate itself has actually gone down. And it's gone down primarily because of the utilities that are decoupling those fixed costs out of the energy rate. So that has caused a flattening of that energy rate. If you took a look at the full rate, which isn't really the way you need to determine that economic savings, you'd see that the rate itself has gone up barely 1 to 2%. But when you look at the energy only rate piece, it's actually been pretty flat, if not down a little bit. And I do want to mention before I talk about some of the tools here that there are available to customers and contractors alike, I do want to mention that the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, has forecasted for the next 20 to 30 years that annual total rate increases for this region is about 1.5%, from 0 to 1.5%. So when you're forecasting the increases in energy over the next 20 to 30 years, the more reasonable increases should be in that 0 to 1.5% range. We've seen proposals where the adjustment has been 3.5%, 4.5%, 5.5%. Those just aren't very accurate compared to what the official forecasts are. And of course, they make the payback periods look a lot shorter. Rates are readily available to find online. They can look, go to LES and PPD, OPPD. Those residential and business rates are all available online for your review. In addition, utilities have these great tools that can be used by contractors and customers. LES has a link to PV Watts, which is put out by the National Renewable Energy Labs, where customers can put in, or contractors can put in the size of system and some other inputs and get an idea of what that production would be. You can also put in that energy rate and get an idea of what the value of that energy production would be. OPPD and MPPD have really great calculating tools that allow you to be even more precise at the residence or the business level. And with that, I'm very pleased to turn things over to my colleague at OPPD, Kirk Esty, to talk about utility interconnection.
All right, Mark, thank you so much for doing that. I will transfer over to my slide, and sorry, I was in the wrong spot there. So first thing I'm going to start talking about here is kind of about the interconnection process and how utilities tend to work with contractors to get customers their solar systems typically that they would like to have installed. So why is this process here? Why are we even talking about it? Well, there's two primary reasons. The first is safety and stability for the grid. The second is that customers, they need a timely and clear process to follow so that they have an idea of how to make their project come together. So the utility needs to make sure that this thing is safe and will not cause issues for other people on the grid. Here are the steps of kind of a typical interconnection process. All the utilities are a little bit different, but they all kind of generally follow the same path. And in future slides, I'm going to talk about more of kind of break down these boxes one at a time. But the first thing that usually happens is the contractor will submit an online application. It could be paper, some utilities are emailing in a scanned copy, but some also have an online application. Then the customer would sign an interconnection agreement, and we're going to talk later about what that is. Then the utility does a technical review of the application. We will see later about what groups are involved in that and why it's necessary. But that is where the utility takes a week at least or more to go through and make sure that that customer-owned generation system or that solar system is going to be safe and not cause power quality issues for the grid. After that technical review is completed, assuming there were no questions or corrections or things that needed to be done, the utility will issue an approval to construct. That gets sent to the customer and the contractor. Then the construction process, the construction phase begins. That is where the solar contractor installs that array. So that could take a couple weeks, couple months, sometimes several months we've seen. But at the end of that, that is where the city or the state, whoever the authority having jurisdiction is, performs the electrical inspection. Once that electrical inspection is completed, it's really important to have that inspector send proof of that successful inspection to the utility, because the utility will need that important piece of documentation to allow it to go and perform the witness test. And that is the final step of the process, where a representative from the utility goes to the customer site and make sure that what was installed is what they applied for approval on. And then they also install the net meter at that point, or reprogram the meter to be a net meter if that's the case, which it is for some utilities. So that's kind of an overall look at what the interconnection process is. Now, contractors, who this seminar is built around, you guys have a level of technical knowledge that is above the typical homeowner. So you guys, as part of your job, need to know what are the technical requirements that each utility has in order to connect to the grid in their area. So each of the utilities on the call today, NPPD, OPPD, and LES, publishes these requirements as customer-owned generation manuals, what OPPD calls theirs, and you can see the other documents there for LES and NPPD. There's many other smaller utilities in Nebraska, and you could reach out to them and ask for their specific guidance document if you're doing work in those areas. Now we're going to just talk a little bit about the form. So like I mentioned, the application form itself could be paper. You could fill it out and scan it and email it to the utility. This is a screen that shows OPPD's online application. You can see it's some pretty basic stuff, you know, name, address, phone number for the customer piece. And then over on the right, you'll see some technical information. What kind of solar panel? How many? What model inverter? How many? Things like that. Basic fundamental information. Then there's a page where you upload the more specific yet important information for this project, like what is the site plan? It's really important, for example, to see where the electrical disconnect is in relationship to the electric meter. That gets to the safety piece, so that line crews can disconnect that if they ever needed to by opening up that AC disconnect and putting grounds on it. The one-line diagram showing where the solar array is, where the inverter is, and it's becoming a bigger deal nowadays. If there's energy storage, where's the energy storage and how is it connected? Because that has a lot of implication as to where electrically the AC disconnect needs to be for proper lineman field crew protection. Now, this is a listing of the technical review groups that typically look at interconnection applications. It's broken into two sections. The one on top is 25 kilowatts and below, which you can think of as kind of smaller systems. And then the larger group at the bottom is for larger systems. So up at top for 25 kilowatts and below, there's about three groups that need to look at it. The distribution engineering people look at it to make sure that the transformers and things in the area can handle it. The distribution people look at it to make sure that the metering systems are sufficient. And then protection automation engineering, they make sure that the inverters and the automatic devices in the system that are supposed to shut down in times of outage, things like that, that everything is going to be safe for the frontline crew that has to be out there in cases of storms and things. So for those smaller systems, that review can be done usually in about a week or so. It takes longer than a week when there's corrections or issues or problems. So that's kind of the smaller ones. Then when you get to the larger ones, which are oftentimes commercial, the number of groups really gets opened up. Now you just have to start looking at substations. You have to start looking at the transmission in the area. You have to get into transmission and distribution operations personnel that actually do the live switching circuits on the grid. And then you get into things like telemetry and communications, so that the utility can actually see what that system is generating and not have it be masked by the load. which is a key element for distribution and transmission planning going forward. And you can see those larger ones, they can take 30 days or more to approve. There's just so many more implications that have to be considered and so many more groups that have to look at it. And then that final step, if you recall the interconnection process, was witness testing. And that is where, at the end, where a utility representative comes out and makes sure that the quantity of solar panels and the model of that solar panel, that's what got installed. The proper inverter model and quantity was installed. And the huge deal of making sure that AC disconnect was where that application said it was going to be installed, and make sure that it is of sufficient design so it has visible breaks so grounds can be put on it and things like that. So that was the final step there with that witness test. Now we're going to talk about the utility interconnection agreement. I get asked this somewhat frequently. What is an interconnection agreement? Why do we need an interconnection agreement? It's basically so that the customer will agree to operate their generator according to some rules that ensure safety and stability out there on the grid. Because when a customer has a solar array, they are a generator just like a coal plant. Might be a little bit smaller, but that power is plenty big to be lethal. It's also plenty big to cause power quality problems for nearby, in particular, nearby neighbors and things like that. So it's necessary because that generator could cause those safety and power quality problems. It's important because a specific design was approved through that interconnection application process. The approval to construct wasn't the approval to construct anything. So the approval to construct was based upon the specific information in that application. So part of this agreement is that the customer agrees to not change the design over the years. You can't, for example, add capacity. If a customer wanted to add capacity or storage, which is kind of common nowadays, a new interconnection application needs to be filed so that that new addition can be considered as its additive impact to the grid in that specific area. The customer, they also agree to operate and maintain the system as designed. Now, utility trade ally programs. Utilities have historically come up with what we've, as an industry, called trade ally programs in areas that we overlap a lot with private industry, where we have lighting programs. So we'll have trade ally programs that have a lot of lighting contractors, or HVAC systems for energy efficiency, for heating and cooling systems. Well, now with so many solar systems coming online, and they need to create kind of alignment and understanding and common knowledge for this new group of contractors and inspectors to work together, utilities are coming up with trade ally programs. I know OPPD is working on a solar trade ally program that I'm about to talk about. And LES, I believe, is working on one too, and you can probably expect others to come up in the future. So this is kind of a quick overview of the planned trade ally program for solar that OPPD is developing. And OPPD calls it a customer-owned generation trade ally program. It's because it's bigger than just solar. It's for any generator that can be operating in parallel with the grid. So it could be solar, it could be small wind. OPPD even has one hydro generator out there behind the meter. It could also be a combustion turbine that's running off maybe landfill gas or something behind an electric meter. So it's any customer-owned generator. This would be a trade ally program in support of the contractors and private industry involved in it. So an overview would be, there's going to be periodic training sessions, maybe a couple times a year, maybe once in the winter, once in the spring, something like that. And it'll be for contractors, electricians, electrical inspectors, some community stakeholders. And at the end of the training, any contractor wishing to be a trade ally would sign an agreement that would specify just some rules that they're going to follow as they represent the program and do the work. And the goals are to improve the knowledge of everybody, the contractors, electricians, inspectors, all those groups, and alignment among all the parties. So there are fewer surprises or unexpected things found in the field that in the end would improve the experience for Nebraska customer-owned generation customers. That's kind of the end goal. So what are the benefits of a contractor? Well, this would allow them to offer utility rebates. If and when OPPD, for example, would allow them to become available, they would be offered through trade ally partners. Then another benefit to contractor would be the referral source. Anybody that would be a trade ally member would be listed on OPPD's website. Then the benefits to the customer, they would get more knowledgeable contractors and ultimately improve satisfaction. They'd have proper expectations because the contractor would be much more knowledgeable about what is going to happen and when, and even get into the financial case that Mark talked about earlier. A trained contractor will have a much clearer idea and be able to answer questions better for those customers so they have the expectations that they should. Then the benefit for the utility is that we have higher approval rates on the first pass through. So those technical review groups, they have other jobs to do so that they would have more efficient use of their time when applications came through cleaner and ready to go. Higher witness test pass rates. So the utility personnel that go out to the field to check the installations, more times they would pass on the first try. Again, more efficient use of utility personnel, happier customers because things are getting approved faster on the first try, and their expensive solar system that they really wanted gets turned on more quickly and they get to enjoy the benefits of it. So that's kind of the end of my portion. I'm going to be handing it off to Dave Rich again over at NPPD, and he's going to address some of the questions that come up.
Thank you, Kirk. Very good presentations by both you and Mark. We've started seeing some questions. One question, does the number of installations, solar installations that was in slide 2 include residential? And my understanding is yes, that is true. The second one I think I'll direct to you, Mark. Does the process at LES change if battery storage is included in the solar installation, and if so, how?
I'm not sure if the process would change. I just think we would ensure that we would have a situation where there'd be no backfeeding if there was a power outage. So we would look at the whole system. When you go online for our interconnection process to start the application for review, you can indicate there's battery storage and you can put a bit of specification with the battery system itself. But it's not inordinately different than it would be for just a standard solar net metered installation. I don't know if it's different with OPPD or MPPD, but.
Kirk, how about OPPD? I saw you had in your application if batteries were installed to check that box.
That's exactly right. You check the box and then it expands out a little data section where you put in the batteries technical specifications.
Okay, here's a question for you, Kirk. Why can't the city and state inspector do the utility inspection? Seems like the local electrical inspector should be able to be trained to do both inspections.
That is a potential idea for the future. We're just not there yet. The first step we thought would be to at least get our authorities having jurisdiction out there trained up and get them on the same page as the solar and the other customer-owned generation contacts, and then work toward that direction. But that is a very good idea.
And there's, at least in the LES situation, when we go out and do the site inspection and when we're looking at the switch, we're also setting a meter. So our electrical inspectors in town aren't necessarily familiar with or trained on doing meter installations. That's something that a utility maintains, that inventory, and installs that meter device from a one-way to a bidirectional meter. So that would be something else to consider how that would work if the utility wasn't going out to perform that important task.
And again, I think that's a good idea to look in the future. I can see potentially some liability issues, you know, if the state inspectors or city are going to take on some utility responsibilities, and if they miss something, how is that all going to sort through lawsuits, that type of a challenge. Another question is NPPD considering a trade ally program for solar contractors? And yes, we've had some preliminary discussion internal. We're going to visit with our wholesale customers, and we're anxious to see what OPPD and LES roll out. I applaud them for taking the lead in developing this, because I think it's a great way to improve the communications, education, and ultimately a better service for the customers. So we will be discussing that with our wholesale customers and retail division as to whether NPPD should move in that direction. We have time for more questions.
There's a couple in the chat, Dave.
Okay, I missed those.
There's one
Would becoming a trade ally require a solar vendor to have a licensed electrician on staff as opposed to hiring third-party electricians? I will leave that to either of you guys, Kirk or Mark, because you're further along with your program. Have you looked at that level?
You know, I don't think that that's something that we would necessarily require out of the box, because we recognize that there are some installers that their business model isn't set up to have an electrician that's licensed. However, the electrical work needs to be done by a licensed electrician according to state code. And so I think initially my thought is that would not necessarily be a requirement, but it'd be something that we'd consider. What would be true, of course, is that those who are ultimately responsible for the installation of the system acknowledge that they understand how the rates are set. They understand what the reasonable adjustments for future increases are. They understand the interconnection process. They understand that the electrical work must be done by a licensed electrician. And so that's kind of how I think we'd approach it as we begin this process early next year. Kirk, what are your...
Yeah, I would agree. A lot of that is National Electric Code. Yeah, we don't, as a utility, we don't require that if somebody was going to be a trade ally that they had licensed electricians on staff. I mean, you could be an engineering firm and be a trade ally. So, but one of the biggest things we have seen is when electric panels have to be upgraded as part of a solar installation, when somebody pulls that electric meter, it needs to make sure that they are at least a journeyman electrician licensed in the state of Nebraska to pull that meter to upgrade that electric panel. That is one of the biggest concerns that we have heard of from electrical inspectors.
Thank you. I'm going to take a minute here to put a plug in for the 14th annual Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference, which is going to be taking place November 8th and 9th in Lincoln, Nebraska. You can register for this event at the same location that you registered for today's webinar, nebraskawsc.com. It's under the 2021 conference tab. There's quite a bit of savings for early bird registration. You can save up to $100 if you register by October 8th. And if you choose not to register early, it does go up and is the highest price if you walk in. The hotel block is at the Cornhusker Marriott, ends October 18th or until it's full. This year, again, we'll have the 3 CEOs from OPPD, LES, and NPPD speak. We have a guest speaker from the Southwest Power Pool to talk about the reliability, more about the February polar vortex event and how things are changing as a result of that. So with that, let's see if we have some additional questions. What is preventing NPPD, OPPD, and LES from adopting a universal or statewide interconnection process that smaller utilities could adopt? Mark or Kirk, you want to take the first shot at that, and then I'll add a little bit about the smaller utilities could adopt.
I think our interconnection process are pretty similar. I can't speak for all of the 160 smaller utilities across the state, but I think, what Kirk outlined at a pretty high level. There's usually some type of an application for review that has requirements for us to review the specs. There is a site inspection, and then there's an interconnection agreement that indicates that the customer will maintain certain things going forward for the safety of the crews, the safety of the public, and the safety of the system. Kirk?
That's a interesting idea that could be a future item that could be possibly looked into. Yeah.
So this is Dave. A couple thoughts. One, good or bad, we all have our own unique software systems that we've developed over the years, interfacing with other programs that we have. And so if we're using, for example, NPPD uses SAP software throughout the company, and I don't believe OPPD uses that. Maybe LES does, I'm not sure. But so there's some challenges there at a bigger software standpoint. And then as far as the smaller utilities, NPPD serves roughly 50 wholesale rurals and munis, and they are welcome, and some of them use pretty much our agreement that we have in place right now. But for them to be able to use a common software, they would have to be paying a fee to be able to get onto that program, and based on the few number of installations, it's probably very hard to justify that additional cost. I would also point out, I got a note that for those who are looking to install solar, the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy has a loan program. And so for those contractors that are working with customers who are looking for some financial assistance, you can get a low-cost loan through NDEE. So that's a good way to help your customer save some money if he's needing to borrow money.
Gentlemen, I'll throw a question to you two. What have you seen recently that kind of were red flags that we've come across in terms of issues that may cause customers to maybe misunderstand maybe the finances of solar, or some other issues that have come up, not with all of the solar installers, but there are a few that have maybe put forth some information that may not have been right on the money.
I received a phone call yesterday from a customer that said that their solar contractor said that they would get a $500 credit on their electric bill if they installed the solar array. And they said, "God, I didn't know you guys worked that closely with any one solar provider." And I just say, this isn't true. Nobody is providing a $500 credit on your electric bill. And so I will be following up with that contractor just to talk about those things as they come up.
And what we've seen, probably the biggest challenge is showing a large savings over the 25 or 30 years based on, one, a large escalation of NPPD retail rates. And when you have large escalation and a fixed price, that tends to make the projects look much better. And as Mark clearly pointed out, our rates have not been going up significantly. And in fact, there's been a focus of moving costs from the energy into the fix, which drives energy costs down. And so more and more utilities will be installing demand rates, and those again will make solar less attractive, most likely, because there's going to be days when your load's going to be there and the sun won't be there to reduce it. So those are probably the biggest challenges. I also got a message here, and I don't know if you have any you wanted to share, Mark, before I move on to another section.
Well, yeah, I think we've seen cases where the electric rate's being calculated wrong. using total bill rather than just the energy portion of the bill. And the adjustments have been significantly out of whack. And the thing that I worry about is that the customers who make the investment, these are pretty significant investments. The customers who make these investments, when they don't realize the savings that was provided to them at the beginning, they're not going to be happy. And what's troubling is that puts kind of a black eye on the entire customer-owned solar market. There are opportunities for customers who want to put rooftop solar or wind or whatever it is. But when you have customers whose expectations are set based on information that isn't 100% accurate, and then a year, 2, 3 down the line, they figure this out. It does not portend well for all of the solar contractors who are probably providing very good information. It just puts a black eye on net metering when it doesn't need to be that way.
Another challenge we've seen is the sales process does really not allow the customer to have ample time to make the decision. It's like, you're going to save all this money, sign the dotted line, and I'm out of here, So I think, in fairness to the customer, they should have ample time to check with their utility, check with a second bid, because typically the customer doesn't understand. If they were going to go out and spend $30,000 on a vehicle, they wouldn't be typically making up their mind in half an hour type thing. They would have a chance to go out and research. Unfortunately, many customers haven't researched it before they've talked to the solar contractor and not sure what questions to ask. And so that's why we had the webinar last week. And again, it's out there on the website. If you have customers and there's utilities listening to this, I encourage them to go out and listen to the webinar with John Hay from UNL and Ron Rose from NPPD. Did an excellent job talking about aspects that the customer should look at.
And the emphasis that we had last week when we were talking primarily to customers, although there might have been contractors online too, which is great, but our line or our mantra was call your utility. We can help you up front. We can provide you with good factual information about the rates, about the interconnection process. And if you're a solar contractor that's providing good factual information and that customer then calls the utility or vice versa, and they hear the same message, the trust they're going to have in you is going to be superb, because they essentially have heard both the utility and the contractor talking off the same page, which creates a great customer experience. So it behooves all of us to be singing from the same hymnal. There was a question here, Dave and Kirk, about have utilities considered any punitive action or rejection of future applications from bad actors or those that are misrepresenting fact. And I believe, Kirk, that's essentially what we're trying to do with the Trade Ally program. Do you want to talk to that a little bit more?
Well, I can talk to it some. Sure. The Trade Ally program is trying to help everybody get on the same page in the customer owned generation realm. Getting on the same page, agreeing to the same kind of standards, information, and truths. And that we agree as a utility and trade allies on those things. And it kind of eliminates some of the questions. We've never, I don't think any of the utilities have gotten together with large numbers of customer-owned generation contractors and talked about some of the things about rates, about the interconnection process, about how things are in Nebraska versus maybe other areas. So I think the need for punitive actions and rejection of applications, a lot of that need goes away once you have a dialogue and some training on a regular basis.
Very well said. I also got a chat note about there's funds available through the USDA REAP grant. So there's a process to apply for that. And I think if you're outside of maybe Omaha and Lincoln and Grand Island, if you're either in the commercial sector, ag sector, you could apply for a grant there. So have I missed any other questions?
There was a statement about how California has a consumer protection guide in their state because obviously solar is just huge. Customer-owned solar is huge out there. So it is fairly unregulated. And so that, that creates, sometimes regulation can cause undue burden and bureaucracy. On the other hand, ensuring that there's good factual information being presented is important. So it's always a balance. But that's a good point.
Other questions? We've gone on about 50 minutes here. We got some more time.
There was a
Again,
question, Dave from looks like just came in on the Q&A window.
Solar installations on ag facilities, hog and poultry barns in particular, more applicable potentially to NPPD because of our service territory. But are we seeing an increase in these type of facilities? And is this an area contractors should look at? Yeah, there's definitely an interest. We've seen several installations on both poultry and swine barns. In fact, it has resulted in some of the wholesale rurals that we serve hitting their 1% net limit or net metering limit that they've set up. And so, but there's more and more interest of that. Again, the challenge is making sure that it's cost effective, knowing what the rates are, working with your electric utility. We've had some installations that became challenging because of a misunderstanding of what the credit was going to be and how things change over time. So again, I would encourage anybody that is looking at that, the contractor, to work with the utility, know the utilities rates, and work early on so that the customer is treated fairly and understands and is happy with the installation. Other questions? So will we be discussing the trade allied programs at the Wind and Solar Conference, or what's the plan timing? Kirk, can you share, do you have a goal for when you would have your program up and running?
Yeah, it's going to be rolling out in January 2022.
Okay, so we will not be ready in November, but it's got a goal of January of 22.
Yep, and we'll be reaching out to to all the contractors that we have been working with on interconnection applications, all the inspectors that we've been working with, and try to get everybody in the room to go over this for the first time.
So how about, I was asked the question, if you have a solar contractor that has 10 employees, how does that work? Are all 10 encouraged to go, or is it training for some of the top management and they're held responsible for their organization, or what's the thoughts there?
The minimum that we want to get trained is the office manager, and then the person that is responsible for filling out applications, interconnection applications. Those are the two people. By benchmarking throughout the country, we talk to other utilities that have thousands and thousands of installations in Texas, Nevada, California, Arizona, to try to hone in on that question: who should you request be there? And that was what it came down to. Yeah, not everybody, because these are businesses that have to make money and be profitable. So we don't want to be onerous. So we want to try to get it to just the people that it's going to really have the biggest impact and be efficient with everybody's time.
I see we have another question. Do all utilities use AC as the installation standard for sizing and connecting a solar or small wind project? And the general answer to that is no. I'm aware that some utilities use DC. I believe all three of us here on this webinar use AC now, but there are still some utilities that use DC. The net metering bill that was passed did not stipulate AC or DC. Thank you for the question. Any additional questions?
I would just add, Dave, as we said last week to our customers that are interested in this, pursuing solar, that the same is true with our contractors. When in doubt, give the utility a call. if you're confused or you're not certain about anything as it pertains to rates, as it pertains to interconnection, as it pertains to anything, we'd much rather get a call up front and talk through something than after an installation has been made and there were assumptions made that weren't accurate. Then everybody's kind of, you know, the customer's caught in the middle and things get kind of out of whack. And so I can't emphasize enough that we're here to help and accommodate and facilitate the process. And we want to work very closely with all of you who are doing great work in promoting solar and putting it in. So when in doubt, give us a call, and we'll be happy to talk to you and meet with you and visit with you about anything.
Exactly, Mark. The worst time to find a problem is at the witness test.
That's right.
Okay, see if we got any new ones. I don't see any new questions. Have I missed any, Mark or Kirk?
Oh, you got it.
We got it. Okay. Well, once again, this was recorded. So if you want to go back and refer to it at any time, feel free to do so. Again, one more plug for the Wind and Solar Conference, and thank them for hosting this. Thanks to Anita for putting this together. And we appreciate all of your participation and looking forward to working with you in the future. Have a great day.
Thanks.